I called Jim Jones today, and I was like, I miss him. I don't know, y'all know it, but I miss him. As a brother, I love his family. I want him to be happy. And Jay, you know, the friendship we had was cool, man. I just miss it. But whatever he doing, but I'm cool with it, bro. I'm sorry, man. I wasn't myself for a second. Ali had me fucked up. And Biggs, I'm sorry, bro, if I offended you. Whatever you doing, I'm with it. I love you, man. And I know you're mad at me, but whatever. I'm sorry. I can admit it. You know, when I make some money, I'll send you something.
Welcome to the night section. Now, there's been this narrative that's been going around that Dame is this might I say victim, that the industry has done him dirty, that he's always just kept it real, that Jay-Z wasn't loyal, that Lyor Cohen ruined Roc-A-Fella, that Dame Dash's decline was a black versus white thing, another attack on a black man. But rarely do I hear people call Dame Dash out for simply just being a bad businessman. But before we get into the nitty gritty, let's give some context on how the decline of Dame Dash started, and that's with the fall of Rockefeller Records. Now, I will give Dame Dash credit. One thing that we can't take away from Dame Dash is that he is a born hustler. At the ripe age of 15, unfortunately after his mother passed, he was forced to learn how to be a man and step up to the plate. Nobody else was going to take care of him, so he had to do what he had to do, and that was hustle in the streets of Harlem, selling drugs. In his early 20s, however, after the birth of his first son, Boogie, and seeing how his friends in the game were being killed, he quickly made the decision to completely cease with the street hustle and turn towards the music industry. He didn't start as an executive right off the bat, but he, along with his friends and former crew called Best Out, got into the promoter hustle, creating a mini business that would throw parties and promote different events at clubs. He was very successful in this venture and decided to extend his talents into the artist management game by first being the manager of rap groups called The Future Sound and Original Flavor. One of his major accomplishments as manager is that he had arranged for both groups to sign a deal with Atlantic Records through Rodolfo Franklin, aka DJ Clark Kent, who acted as an A&R executive for Atlantic Records at that time. Who also, by the way, plays an important role in the story because he's the one that introduced Dame Dash to a young aspiring rapper from Brooklyn named Jay-Z.
You introduced Dame to Jay.
Yes.
Did you know that Dame would be good for him for a period of time?
Yes, because he was relentless.
Did you ever think that maybe it could go badly?
I had given Dame a record deal for Original Flavor and for the Future Sounds, and his attitude towards doing it was relentless. And it's not even like he had the best artist at that moment. It's just that his attitude towards his artists was, oh, you're just not gonna sit down. You want everything. So to me, it took somebody with that type of attitude, who also knew the streets, that could, halfway even begin to have the conversation.
Dame Dash quickly got to managing Jay-Z, realizing just how talented he was. And as for Dame Dash and Kareem Biggs Burke, the third co-founder of Roc-A-Fella, by the way, and how they met, the two go all the way back, being in the crew that I mentioned earlier, the Best Out crew.
We know way before this, probably when Dame first talked to me about doing Rockefeller Records, we talked about clothes, liquor, the music, and actually the only thing we probably didn't do was the amusement park. We talked about that too. Dame had a lot of ideas.
Rock amusement park.
Yeah, Dame had a lot of ideas at that time. So everything that we were doing, it was actually something that we talked about maybe
so that was already
4
the
or 5 years.
For lack of a better term, the blueprint from jump.
Yeah, prior to that.
So that line that Jay says, 80 mil, that was a real thing.
Yeah, that was a real one. Yeah, 18 months, yeah.
As most of you guys should know by now, Rockefeller Records was a label born out of necessity back in 1995. Jay-Z was originally signed to Payday Records, but quickly realized that they weren't doing much for him. In the book Jay-Z and the Rockefeller Dynasty, written by Jake Brown, Jay-Z explains in short, quote, "Payday eventually signed me to a deal, but were acting shady the whole time. Like they didn't know how to work a record or something. The things that they were setting up for me, I could have done myself. They had me traveling places to do in-stores, and my product wasn't even available in the store. We shot one video, but when the time came for me to do the video for the second single, I had to be cut out. They gave me the money and I started my own company. There was a little arguing back and forth, but our conflict finally got resolved. The bottom line was they wasn't doing their job, so I had to get out of there." End quote. The first and only singles that Jay-Z released with Payday Records was a song titled In My Lifetime and its B-side I Can't Get With That. Both songs released before his debut album, Reasonable Doubt. Now, after leaving Payday Records, Jay and Dame were shopping the Reasonable Doubt album around to practically every label and radio station they could find, to no avail, as they got rejected at every turn. So at that point, they had no choice but to pull the money they had from the Payday deal together, along with Biggs, to create their own label, as we all know, called Rockefeller Records, whose name, by the way, was inspired by the first billionaire ever, John D. Rockefeller. And I guess you could say the rest is history. In 1996, Reasonable Doubt was officially released by Rockefeller, distributed through Priority and Freeze Records. Though Reasonable Doubt wasn't a success right away, or rather immediately after its release, it ended up selling 420,000 copies in its first year. And I mean, you would think by that metric, especially being an independent label at that time, that they'd be swimming in at least minimum $2 to $3 million. But turns out, according to Biggs, in a 2016 Genius interview, he explains that they only made $30,000 to $40,000. And that's due to the miscommunication in negotiating the distribution deal they had with Priority and Freeze Records. Biggs says, quote, "In 95, Jay-Z and Dame approached me and was like, look, we've been trying to get this done, but we think the better play is to kind of do it ourselves. Instead of getting a label deal, we should just go independent and own 80% of the record and get a distribution deal. The deal we signed with them, we thought we had 80%, but it was 80% of Jay's piece, which was a small piece. It really wasn't the deal we expected, so instead of making $3 or $4 million, we probably made $30,000 or $40,000, end quote. Now luckily, they were locked in for only one project, so for Jay's next project, they vowed to never make the same mistake again, which led them to signing a 50-50 partnership and distribution deal with Def Jam before the release of Jay's sophomore album, In My Lifetime Volume 1. And it appeared, especially after the success of Volume 2, Hard Knock Life, which is, by the way, Jay's best-selling album, selling over 5 million copies in the US alone, everything appeared to be smooth sailing. Your typical American success story, making something out of nothing. However, some say that this was the beginning of the end for Dame Dash.
It's hard to say what really ultimately contributed to Dame's decline. You know, my take on Dame has always been he was a great guy with a good heart whose mouth just got in the way too much.
As the Rockefeller brand got bigger, signing acts such as Memphis Bleek, Beanie Siegel, Freeway, and later on the Cam'rons, Kanye's, etc., as well as expanding to other ventures outside of music like fashion and film, Dame's ego also started to get bigger.
Dame started being famous. You know, the camera. He fell victim to the camera. You know, you're liable to say anything. You could beat anybody. Or I think if Dame would have played the role as Kareem Burks did, and just played the background and just handled the business correctly, maybe Rockefeller still would be, you know, the force that we was. And then, but on the second hand, I think Jay was growing.
Now fast forward to the end of Rockefeller, we don't know exactly why or how Rockefeller split, but it's been speculated that a big part of it was because Dame started acting quote-unquote Hollywood. He wanted to now become the center of attention. Well, let's be honest, that 90% of the reason Rockefeller became what it was because they were leveraging Jay-Z's talent and star power to not only attract other acts to sign, but to legitimize their business so they'd be able to work with already established heavy hitters like Def Jam. Without Jay-Z's work, that partnership would not have been possible. They built the business on the back of Jay-Z, which Dame Dash obviously started to forget. He also started to forget that in corporate America, when you're working with high-level executives and industry people, you can't scream and yell at people. Not only is that inhumane and disrespectful, it shows that you lack self-control, have low emotional intelligence, and frankly just have unaddressed anger problems.
Dame and Jay, well, I mean, everybody knows Damon was just and Biggs. Damon was screaming all the time. I don't even know for what. For
Was it
what
passion?
Was just at a certain point, you know. Part of the key in this business is to help motivate people to work to a common goal and to create a vision and articulate the vision and have people working, motivate people. And, you know, screaming and insulting and irregular, you know, it was all over the place. Wasn't productive, you know.
The difference between someone like a Dame Dash and a Biggs is that Biggs knew how to play his position. He faded into the background and got to work on the actual business. That's why we often forget to mention Biggs when we talk about Roc-A-Fella, because he played it so well. He was the puppet master behind the scenes. What Dame, I think, underestimated at the time was Jay-Z's ambition. So when we talk about artists in general, artists want to be the star of the show. And Dame Dash at that time, especially with all his theatrics, him now making major label decisions without Jay-Z, as well as yelling at employees and execs, it was taking too much of the attention away from Jay, as well as tainting the reputation of the brand, because whispers started to travel across the industry about Dame and how he's a ticking time bomb. But the key here is that the only reason people were still tolerating Dame was because of Jay-Z. So when Jay decided to end the partnership, it was over for Dame. Nobody had to care about him anymore. He was quote unquote blackballed, but I mean, I think we can all agree that we wouldn't work with anyone that yelled at us like this.
Look, y'all niggas are too fucking professional and you're too smart to make these kind of dumbass mistakes. You alright? Sony wouldn't do this. Lyor gets his props. RCA don't take that. Bad Boy gets his prop. Ashton don't take that. But Face gets his prop. Y'all gotta have your fucking face in everything we do. Then I gotta be the asshole and yell. I don't feel like doing that shit all the time. I'm sick of that shit. Yo, for 30% of my day goes to correcting your fucking mistake. They're gonna pay me more for that? It is true, man.
But what the end of the partnership in time really revealed is that Dame Dash just isn't a good businessman. In the last 20 or so years, for the most part, it's been crickets when it comes to business achievements. Well, if you're not counting Dame's verbal diarrhea of him saying he's a boss every 12 seconds. But we haven't seen him replicate a Roc-A-Fella successfully, or even break an artist like he quote-unquote broke Jay-Z. But like one of my favorite Jay-Z lines in the song Lost Ones, quote, "I heard mother suckers saying they made Hove say, okay, so make another Hove. N-words wasn't playing their day role, so we parted ways like Ben and J-Lo," end quote. So essentially, Jay-Z is saying, if you so-called made me or are taking credit for my success, you should be able to replicate it. And it's true. Then he basically explains in the last two lines why he ended his partnership with Dame. And once again, it's because he wasn't playing his position. He didn't know how to act. But when again, talking about replicating success, that theory could be applied across the board. I mean, if you're such a business tycoon, make another Roc-A-Fella, make another 8-figure business. So we have to ask ourselves at this point, was Dame Dash just a one-hit wonder when it came to business, like we see plenty of artists having one-hit singles and falling off? I mean, this could very well be applied to entrepreneurs as well. Unfortunately, time reveals all, and it has shown that he clearly was just at the right place and at the right time, because he has made no significant business moves ever since. It's just the truth. I mean, if he was so successful, he wouldn't be missing child support payments. Now, we can clearly see Dame Dash is a bad businessman just based on his track record post Roc-A-Fella, and we can break this down in 4 ways. Now, there might be more, but here are just the fundamentals. So number 1, we have reputation. If you have read the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene or heard about the 48 Laws of Power, law number 5 is, so much depends on your reputation, guard it with your life. Quote, reputation is the cornerstone of power. Through reputation alone, you can intimidate and win. Once it slips, however, you are vulnerable and will be attacked on all sides. Make your reputation unassailable. Always be alert to potential attacks and thwart them before they happen. Meanwhile, learn to destroy your enemies by opening holes in their own reputations. Then stand aside and let public opinion hang them. End quote, Robert Greene. So basically, in short, Robert Greene is saying your reputation is everything. For Dame Dash, he ruined his own reputation. Jay-Z didn't have to do much in that regard. Dame tried to be a dictator, thought he was better than what he actually was, throwing insults and yelling at people. And hey, you might argue that someone like Steve Jobs was yelling at people too, and he wasn't the easiest person to be around either. However, the difference is that Steve Jobs was both the talent and the brains, and he revolutionized the cell phone, a big difference between him and someone who built a business off of someone else's talent. If he was thinking long term and had some humility back then, he would have realized that the only true reason he was in the position that he was in was because of Jay-Z. So in my head, I would do everything I can to make sure Jay-Z is happy. But no, when you get high on your own supply, you fail to assess the situation you're in correctly, and you get too ahead of yourself and ruin a good thing. But life has a funny way of showing us what's real, because when the split happened and Dame launched his own multiple failed businesses, he quickly realized, whether he admits it publicly or not, that he just isn't as good as he thought he was. And also, if he had carefully crafted his reputation and understood that reputation in business is super important, he'd have people to call on. Which goes into number 2, your network is your net worth. Relationships in business are everything. As the saying goes, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And we should add, it's who you know that still likes you. Because in any business, you need people. If you're just trying to sell lemonade on the street corner, maybe not. But I'm pretty sure if you're trying to scale and have a multi-million-dollar business, you do. Which means you have to treat people right. And unfortunately for Dame, success within the music business, especially back in the 90s, was heavily reliant on rubbing shoulders with execs and not pissing those same people off. But he managed to do so, which led to his ultimate demise, and why he's had no success within the industry ever since. He only has himself to blame, and we need to get rid of this idea of thinking that quote-unquote keeping it real means you need to be rude, or that if you're able to communicate and have relationships with higher ups, it means you're fake or you sold out. It's called playing the game. And if you want to succeed in any industry at the highest level, it's something that you have to do. Or you can simply stay where you're at. But clearly, Dame hasn't understood that, because he's also been known to get into some sort of rift with literally everyone he's ever had any sort of business dealings with, which includes Jay-Z, Lyor Cohen, Kevin Liles, Benny Siegel, Currency, Lee Daniels, Jim Jones, Kenyatta Griggs, from Hip Hop Motivation, just to name a few. It seems as though he can never end a business relationship on good terms. He always has to burn a bridge, which is something that good businessmen don't do. Number 3, loose lips. A loose cannon is always bad for business. For you guys that don't know what that means, it is someone who's unpredictable and just creates chaos. In the case for Dame Dash, it applies to his personality as well as his mouth. And the chaos is exponential because he says unwarranted things publicly. Whenever he's opened his mouth in the past, especially in interviews, he almost always had some disparaging remarks to say about everyone, particularly Jay-Z. From calling people culture vultures to airing out apparently the 10,000 different and constantly changing reasons as to why Rockefeller broke up, and just his crass nature overall. And it seems as though these last 20 years he's done more talking than actually doing. He put CEO on a hat but hasn't really shown that that's what he actually is. Post Rockefeller, his track record has just been one failed business after the other. Maybe that's why he's been so stuck on his Jay-Z situation. But what I love on Jay-Z's part is that he really hasn't said much in response to any of the smack Dame Dash has talked, and has moved in silence and proved through his actions that he is above it. The difference between a Jay, who's a real businessman, to a Dame who clearly isn't. Number 4, broke mindset. Dame Dash has a broke mindset. And when I mean broke mindset, I guess you could say the opposite of a growth mindset or a real entrepreneurial mindset. What really was the nail in the coffin for me is when he said this.
Well, let's talk about you. Do you feel like you get your props as a mogul, man?
I don't care. I take my props.
Word.
Give a fuck about props. I care. Yeah, I do get my props. I'm not a mogul. I'm a tycoon. I sell oil. Don't disrespect me and say I do everything everybody else does. And I put up my own money. All these so-called moguls y'all talking about, you name one of them that put their own dough up. A boss, you're only the boss if you put up your own money. If you don't put up your own money, I don't care how much somebody gives you, you're nothing but a supervisor. It's not yours. So how much money can you get paid to not... there's no money in this world.
This is probably the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life, when practically every successful entrepreneur has leveraged other people's money at one point or another, whether that be through investors, loans from banks, or raising money through crowdfunding, etc. By Dame's logic, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, who have both raised and borrowed money, aren't bosses, when they're two of the greatest entrepreneurs to have ever lived. This just goes to show that Dame Dash has no idea what he's talking about, and his way of thinking is flawed. Not to mention, he never has truly taken accountability for his part in the end of Roc-A-Fella or his current financial situation where he blew through his $50 million fortune. Night section out.